Hi, welcome back to Lockyer Learning Lab. Now today you have to study quite hard and you need to listen very carefully because today is obligation and necessity. So let's go and start studying.
Which structures can we use to show obligation and necessity? Now you're probably going to say yes, we can use have to and must. You're going to be right. We're going to have a look at these and see exactly how and when we use them. Okay, I'm going to look at the different patterns of these verbs. Okay, how can we show a strong obligation that comes from the speaker? Okay, so the person who's speaking is making the obligation. Now if we look at this sentence, if you want to pass the exam, you harder, and the verb we're going to use is work. Now here we would use must, okay, or have to. So if you want to pass the exam, you must work harder. Now here we use must. It's very typical because that feeling is coming from the speaker and they're telling the other person that it's really necessary for them to work. So usually when it's directly from one person to another, we use must. I mean, you could say you have to work harder, but you can also say here must, and that really shows that that person wants to emphasize that the other person needs to work hard. Now, how can we give a recommendation directly to another person? So it's not like an obligation, but we're telling them, no, this is a good idea, you should do this. You that film, it's brilliant, and we've got the verb see. Okay, so again, we're going to use the verb must, the modal verb must. So you must see that film, it's brilliant, all right? Now here it's like a really strong recommendation. It's a great film and I want you to see that film. What about when we want to show obligation from a third party? Okay, maybe it's a rule at work or something that's not directly from one speaker to another. So here we've got a uniform for my job, okay, and the verb is wear. Now here we'd have to use have to, okay? I have to wear a uniform for my job, because here it's not the speaker who's telling me to do this, it's another person. It's like the company where I work has a rule and I have to follow that rule, all right? So it's like a third person involved in this. If we want to make a question with have to, how do we make that question? So let's have a look. What for homework? Okay, and the verb is do. To make the question, this is a kind of semi-modal verb, so we need an auxiliary verb and it's present tense. So we're going to use, in this case, do. Okay, what do we have to do for homework? Okay, so we use the auxiliary verb, the subject, have to, and the infinitive. Okay, because this is what's we called a semi-modal verb. What about in the past? Okay, imagine we want to talk about an obligation in the past. How do we do this? Can we use must? Well, the answer is no, we can't use must because in the past there's no form of must. We have to use had to. So we had to get up at 6 a.m. every morning. What about the question? If we want to ask the question in the past about an obligation in the past, how would we do that? Well, we're going to need an auxiliary. So we've got to enter the museum and pay. Okay, and this is like last week, yeah, for example. So we need an auxiliary verb in the past, and that's going to be did. Did you have to pay to enter the museum? If you were making a question with must, how would you make a question? Now, it's not very typical. I have to tell you, it's not very typical, but you could make a question with must. It's normally quite ironic. So, must you speak so loudly? All right. So we'd use auxiliary subject verb, well, modal verb, but it's not really typical. Yeah, it would be more typical to say, do you have to speak so loudly? How do we say if something is forbidden? So we've got the sentence, you a mobile phone when you are driving, and the verb is use. Okay, this is something that you know is definitely not allowed. Okay, so here we're going to use the modal verb must, but in the negative. Okay, so you mustn't use a mobile phone when you are driving. Now mustn't is the same if it's like from one person to another or with a third party, a third person, it doesn't matter. Okay, we're going to use that negative, which is mustn't, right? It's prohibited. What about a strong recommendation to another person about something which is not a good idea? All right, so again, very similar. We just say you so hard, or you'll make yourself ill. We've got the verb work. Here we're going to say you mustn't work so hard or you'll make yourself ill, right? You need to take a rest, okay? You need to relax. So you mustn't work. So we use the modal verb, then not, and then the infinitive. What about if we have to say that something is not necessary? Something is not necessary. So if you say, you to class next week. Imagine next week is a holiday, so it's not necessary to come to class. How can we say that? Which verb would we use? Would we use must or have to? How would we use that? So here we're going to use, you don't have to come to class next week. Okay, this means that it is not necessary. It's not prohibition. It means it's not necessary because next week is a holiday. Okay, so now you have some transformations. All right, so I've also thrown in a few phrasal verbs there to make it a bit more challenging for you. So I hope you enjoy those. Good luck.